Press it.
Press it real good.
Meow, 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 meow. Yeah, let's not get demonetized in the first, like... Actually, we don't get monetized yet.
Yeah.
Oh, never mind. Meow, 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 meow.
Hopefully, we are live and you can hear me and my singing partner, Jan.
Hello.
How's everybody doing this evening? Let us know if you can hear us fine. Last week, we had a few hiccups getting going.
Seems we can, although I am blurry. I'm very blurry. Why am I so blurry? Oh, because the autofocus is back on. Excuse me, let me fix that.
It's focused on your camera. Sorry, you're on your microphone rather than your face.
That should fix it.
Yes. Nice.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I hope you've all had a lovely week since we last saw you, and a lovely week so far. And you're all doing fun things for Valentine's next week.
Speaking of, I might not be around next week.
Ooh.
So, yeah. This might be one announcement for 2 weeks. Or we might get a different one on a different day. We'll sort that out and we'll let you know anyway.
Yeah, we have no plan.
But to today's talk. So Jan and I had a quick catch up this morning, and it was weird. We instantly managed to work our way to today's topic.
Yeah, I don't know if you know this about us. We are able to go off on tangents. So we started talking about work-related emails, and within 30 seconds, we were off on today's topic.
Apparently, you're a little bit quiet.
Hello, Stan. Hello, Louis. Or Louis. Or Louis. Or Louis.
I've got you turned all the way up my end, so I presume
I'll check my end. If not, I'll move the microphone closer.
You can move it closer to your face. I mean, it's not in shot anyway. Not like this one.
Check. I have none of
Hello, everybody.
Pulse audio.
Oh, true, yeah.
How about that? That should be a little bit louder. It's a little bit louder and covered in bees.
Nice.
All right, so what's the topic today?
The topic today is, well, how did we get around to today's topic? I think it'd be great to sort of like go through the conversation we had earlier when it came to the flow of basically discussing the flow of assets that we had and suddenly realizing that some of the decisions we made are great. But if we had
said hello, Roderick, and hello, Stan, and hello, Roderick, and hello, Louis, or Louis, and hello, Mikey, and hello, Cat. Yes. So if we want to get there, I should ask people the question I asked you, which triggered all of this.
Which is
a hot dog a sandwich? So take
a
moment.
Very good question.
Ponder, and you can write your answers in the comments, or if you're watching this later in the doobly-doo.
Comments. Yeah.
Michael, would you say a hot dog is a sandwich?
And my answer earlier was if you zoom out and just look at it holistically, yes. It's something in between bread.
Now, what interests me about this question is not the question itself, because my answer is, if you like.
It doesn't really
matter.
What
interests me is how passionate I've seen people get about this on social media. Like, they will actually argue about if a hot dog is a sandwich. Because, well, my thinking for this is humans love categories, right? Like, our brains work through pattern recognition. Putting things in categories makes things easier. And categories make things really easy. Up to a point.
Yes. In fact, the thing that actually sparked the conversation is I've been moving a lot of my data around recently, and I ended up with the best part of 10 terabytes worth of data over the last 20 plus years. I've managed to sort of start organizing it about, and now I've actually organized it and deduplicated a lot of the data. I suddenly realized that I'm going to have a bit of a categorization, because over those 20 years, I've had different standards and different ways of categorizing my work. And you don't want to end up with a system that has a hierarchy so big you can't find anything except by searching. So you only really want to go a couple of layers deep whenever you do that. But then you end up with replacing that depth of search with breadth of search if you're not careful. So it's very different. And that very quickly came on to discussing how an asset pipeline would work when it comes to naming conventions. Where do you put your textures? Where do you put your models? Where do you put this? Where do you put that? Because I've certainly had in the past an issue when it comes to the way that an artist would want to have assets stored and their textures stored is different to how the game developer's going to want their hierarchy.
Right.
And that you have to work to one or the other standards, or you have to have like a hard break where the game developer never gets your hierarchy. They get like a baked version that comes out in their new hierarchy. But then you end up with 2 bits of data that are no longer synchronized. So if you update a texture and don't push it, the other team don't get it, which is bad.
And that brought us on to trying to figure out workflow when you're first starting a game, right? Especially if it's not just you, if it's multiple people working on it, where you really need to understand how the assets are going to be created and what they need to do and how they're going to be used. Like, you need to understand how you're going to read the stuff and all the rest of it. And if I can share my screen real quick, I can show the example we were talking about.
Yep. Let me know when you shared it, and then I'll just have to move stuff about. Awesome. Because I'm going to have to move you about to do this properly.
All right, and I'm going to do this so I can still see your face. Okay, so
last
week we looked at our first pass.
There we go.
Well, I'm going to explain it while you're doing it.
Okay.
We looked at our first pass of procedural weapon generation. And one of the things I did when I was making this sword maker scene was I created a system for materials. So if we if we load up the hilt of the blade of a sword, right?
Yeah.
We'll say set the surface by the material, etc., etc. So we have a bunch of materials for our weapons. So let me find our materials. Here's our weapon materials. Mikey's camera is just broken.
Oops. Yeah.
So let's look at copper. And if I look at copper, I've got the actual material it's using, like the actual well, it's not a texture, but the spatial material it's using. How much damage is added by this material and how much value. And then I had this great idea. Let's make it feel a bit more organic while still making it an algorithm. So when we're generating this, the edge of the blade counts more towards damage than the center of the blade, but the center of the blade counts more towards the value, like how much you can buy it for, the material cost.
Yeah.
Which is great, except that was never part of the original design. And I saw no reason to share that with Michael. And some of the swords, when you look at the actual mesh, surface 1 is the edge, and on some of them, surface 1 is the center, which starts having gameplay impacts. Because now, what you think is a, gold and steel sword is now a steel and gold sword, which suddenly starts becoming important because it'll do less damage than you're expecting or be worth less money than you're expecting. And that's interesting because that was just a little failure in communication. And it's at this stage a really easy fix. But because of the way we've categorized our workflow, I never communicated how I was going to use these meshes. I just said, give me some meshes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, Michael.
Okay. I will. There you go, full screen. Right. Let's move you back over here. So yeah, and one of the things that very, very quickly we came across was going back and trying to sort those out could be a lot of work, because potentially hundreds of weapons. In this case, it's only 5 blades, 5 hilts, 5 pummels, or something along those lines. So it wouldn't be too arduous to go back and put material slot 1 has this, material slot 2 has that. But what happens when both it's a steel and steel sword? I'm likely to only put the one material on the whole model. So suddenly you get a blade that's only got one material.
What if the weapon has more than 2 channels, but you decide that this particular model looks better with only 2, or just with only 1? Well, suddenly the whole way we're generating weapons doesn't make sense. Or do you have to put all those materials in for every model, even if you don't use them? At which point, what's the impact on draw calls?
Yes, because you could have a load of unused material slots essentially, but they're on the object, and I'm guessing it's engine dependent, because you may find that one engine, Unreal, might be clever and go, well, they're not being used, I'll cull them. Another engine might go, well, they're on there, so I'm going to use them. So you end up with these draw calls on models that it doesn't need.
Potentially. I actually don't know if Godot will do the draw call if it's not used. I haven't experimented with this.
No.
So yeah, we wanted to talk about different ways you can organize your workflow, the kinds of conversations you want to be having, even if you're just working by yourself. Because it's one of those things where redesigning a system from the ground up is much more difficult than designing it from the ground up. Especially if you're doing something critical like, hey, let's add in multiplayer. Right? That is not a conversation you want to have halfway through the development of a game. Or even there are some games on Steam that add multiplayer after they've been out for a year, and I'm like, that must have been an insane amount of work. Like, I don't even understand how you okayed that. Like, more power to you, but no.
Unless it was designed with multiplayer in the first place, it just wasn't ready at the launch, so they promised it later on. Yeah, that's always a possibility. Yeah, and a lot of the stuff that we end up going through is great because we've got hindsight and we've got the capacity to go backwards and forwards and work out a journey from there.
Well, we've also got a thing where we're creating everything at least twice, once for our prototype and once for the course. So the mistakes we make in the beginning are actually really valuable for us because we can, avoid them and use them as teaching moments.
Yeah, definitely. I've just done a quick bit of research, by the way. It appears certainly of the last version of Unreal, they do count for draw calls. I don't know about Godot, but it's probably quite standard that the material, if it's in the slot, then it's a loaded material and therefore it's a draw call. So watch out.
You better watch out. You better watch.
No.
Yeah, Roderick says it's just adding another player, right? Yeah, sure. Ow, that hurts. So, if we use this procedural weapon design that we've been talking about and playing with as a starting point, right? Because when it first started, one of the questions Michael asked was, do you want me to just generate a bunch of weapons and hand them to you, like remade?
Yeah.
And my answer was no, I want you to give me the pieces because it's going to be easier and smaller to generate them in Godot than it is to handle a much larger file size and then pick the one we want out of that list.
Yeah, definitely. You're dealing with the difference of, let's say each part of a 3-part weapon, there's 5 individual parts, then you've got 15 parts. So that's a lot less memory intensive. And then you assemble them in Godot and done. If you've got that and all their permutations, and I give you all of those, you've got actually more things to go through, more materials to check, more assets to put together, which is something that we want to optimize as much as possible.
Now, this does have some side effects. One of them is, if we'd gone with the original suggestion, Mikey could have curated them. This sword looks too much like that one. This one is boring. That's ugly. This is really cool. Let's do a couple more like that.
Yeah.
Right? We can't do that. So we now have to handle that at the modular stage and at the algorithm stage rather than just having swords that look cool.
The great thing, though, with anything being modular is you do end up with some happy accidents, things that you would have never come across or potentially never come across during even my random generation. That's one of the key things.
I mean, also just playing with materials, and I put in gem and bone just to see what would happen, and we ended up with some really cool looking weapons. I'd say we could run the generator on your side because it'll look better. We just have to put in the randomize line because I forgot to put it.
I shall. Well, has it changed since the last time? Do I need to pull?
Nope.
So I think it's still going to work because I think we added that back in last time. I'll just test it anyway before.
Well, if not, it doesn't matter. The first one will be a pure Mikey is awesome material.
Oh, because it always picks the first material as the first one.
Because I didn't call randomize.
Yeah. So I'll just it's just loading up. I'll check it first of all, and we'll show off what we've got so far.
It will be in the script randomswordmaker.gd.
Oh no, I think we fixed it because I don't get Mikey's awesome material.
Great.
So I can just switch to my screen in that case. That's the wrong one. There we go. Shove us off to the side and switch over to my screen.
Great. You can share your screen with me, or I could be 30 seconds behind. I don't really mind.
If I do that, can you see the screen?
Great. Yep.
Yep. Cool.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about this algorithm last week, but basically if materials, the two materials that it's looking for are the same, it'll say pure, which is done 2 in a row, which I'm a little worried about. One more time? No, okay, fine. That was a coincidence. So here, gold and steel, right? So gold is the outside and steel is the inside. So the damage is not very good because gold doesn't have a lot of damage, and the value is not very good because steel isn't that expensive. So this is not a great weapon, but a steel and gold sword would be much better. So you can get some really nice ideas. Like I've got Weathrill, which is green, and Lilacium, which is purple. And, you just end up with assets that you wouldn't necessarily have made. But we also have to deal with things like the pommel. The pommel, if you're not sure, is the roundy bit at the bottom of the hilt. And it's the counterweight to the sword. And those are being randomly selected too. And the material is being applied from the available materials. But we have to have them moving depending on where they need to go. So each hilt is a different size. We can't use the same origin as the handle and the hilt. So now we need a system for moving those.
Yeah.
If Michael had just generated 200 swords in Blender and given me a file of 200 swords, none of that would be necessary. So the decisions we make at the beginning are having impact on how that work goes through.
A wood and copper sword. I want that in Minecraft
damage.
now.
7 damage.
I do like
11 gold. This is a toy.
Essentially, yes. So yes, there's lots to be thought about right at the very beginning, and obviously we also went over a stretch goal, which is absolutely awesome. But that also moves more things in that we didn't think we were going to be doing, sadly, but we are. So that's awesome.
So I think it's worth talking about how we decided to solve this, because procedural weapons came in quite late. Procedural armor has also come in, although we haven't started working on that yet. We're using the techniques we're learning from this for the armor.
Yeah.
And there are various ways you could do this, right? You could just have a number of swords, and then you put in a material, and then you randomly select a name and a particle effect. We could have done that. We decided to go with modular swords. Michael, would you like to talk about your side of that? Like why that felt like a good decision for you?
Yes, so I'm lazy. So if I can do something a couple of times and end up with a vast variety from it, then it's going to be a winner all out. Now, hopefully, one of these blend files works. No, I've moved my weapons file. I'm not going to try and find it live. Oh, actually, I know where it is. So, yeah, I'll...
Is your camera reversed?
It might be.
It's changed.
I don't know.
The microphone's on a different side. Sorry, carry on.
I don't know what's going on. Anyway, let me open the weapon file within Blender itself. It's taken me a few seconds to go through. But yeah, essentially, you can sit down, you can design weapons, and you can get them working with, well, basically however you want. But essentially, if something's made from parts and those parts are standard, making an object suddenly be modular is not that difficult to do. Let me just set up this blend file, and I need my OBS so I can switch over to my scene. If I do this with a small head, hopefully you guys can see me. Awesome. So this is our basic file. We've got a series of blades inside a collection called blades, and we'll be using that to build the sword, essentially. And we've got the origin, as Jan was saying earlier, of both the blade and we've called this hilt, but I think the hilt.
I mean, it's the hilt, it's the cross guard, and it's the grip. So if you want to get technical, we've lumped them all in together as hilt.
Yes, and they've all got associated empties with them because the empties are necessary for Jan to line up where the pummel ends up going, which is, well, it's pretty awesome. So we've got a hilt collection there, and then we've also got a pummel collection, which looks like they're turned off. So hold on a second. There we go. So we've got a load of pummels, and they have their origin there because once again they're placed using the empties. And then we're actually going to use geometry nodes to run through and generate a particular shape. So if I hide out the way the blades, the hilt, and the pummel, and then we've got a weapon here, and this weapon has been randomly put together and generated using geometry nodes. If we click on it here, we get a nice setup here. And what we will end up doing is working through each individual one. I think this one doesn't go too deep into... well, it's not too difficult. It's not a massive, deep layer of nodes. Once you've learned how to do one, you can very easily do another. I'm trying to come up with a better way of doing a bit of randomness at the moment. I'm not entirely happy with the way. Unfortunately, if you pick a random value in Blender within the geometry nodes itself, it's the same random value of the seeds. The same. So it's not a different value every time.
So you need to randomize it. You need a randomize function.
And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to link it to the actual frame that you're on. So it's got a different starting seed basically every time. And in that case, the issue there is it's then got a temporal component to it. But if you're doing an animation and still want random stuff, suddenly that becomes very difficult because you can't do one and the other. So I'm still sort of like burying my head in the weeds trying to get that out there. And eventually, did I leave this in a state that it was runnable because I was working on it? We've got a script here that will run through a range of weapons. So we can come in here and say, I want 5 weapons. And I just click play, and if my script is working, which it would be a miracle if it was, I think it's worked. I think if I go into D, this is the mess, by the way, I was talking about earlier, current projects, and go into weapons, what I should find is a folder, a GLB, with 5 different weapons in. And each one of these weapons, all being well... No, I have done something that broke it. I thought it might be this. But all being well, once it's not completely broken, we'll have 5 separate weapons. So, this one looks like it worked. Perhaps it was just the first one that came across. There's another randomly generated one and another one. So we'll be going through the process of actually randomly generating it so you can output random stuff and just use it over in Godot or any engine that you want. The course itself, when it comes out later on towards the end of this month, we will have basically your ability to export to any engine that you want. It doesn't have to be a GLB. I've picked that because that's compatible with Godot. But that's the main thing, being able to have it so it's platform agnostic as well. And then if you wanted to, you could give someone... the coder of your team, or you, if you're wearing that hat, you can just pick up your mesh pieces, randomly generate them in Engine, or randomly generate them in Blender. Really,
because some solutions are right for some games and not for others. I'm going to pick up on something you said earlier, right at the beginning of this, when I said, do you want to talk through why you felt it was the right fit from your side? You said, because I'm lazy. And there's something very interesting in the book Procedural Generation in Game Design, which is Boop. We'll come back to this month. Mikey, you said the course coming out this month. You better tell them which course, because otherwise they're going to think all of the courses are coming out this month, and I'm not dealing with that. Okay, so in procedural generation in game design, one of the first questions they ask is, why should you use procedural generation, or when should you? And a bad reason for doing it is it's going to save me time. It probably isn't. It might, but the amount of tweaking you'll need to do in the scripting and wherever you're doing procedural generation to get the kind of results you actually want to use is not actually going to be shorter than handcrafting everything necessarily. Yes. But if we want a game where, we have a certain aesthetic in the game and we want the game to feel and look a certain way, but we want to have the excitement of, I've not seen this particular sword before, or I really like this one, I'm keeping it, or this is highly cool and massively overpowered, I'm not selling this.
Yeah.
We also want the situation in our game where I've just picked up a bunch of swords that do no damage but are worth a crap ton of money. I'm going to use these to buy upgrades for my town.
Yeah, totally. And
Michael, what's this month's business?
so they ran the procedural weapons in Blender, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I said to be lazy, and that's because I've got a bit of hindsight of making procedural stuff, and therefore I fully appreciate if you needed to make like 5 different swords, doing it procedurally is not going to save you time. In fact, it's going to probably take longer. Most procedural things take a lot longer to do than doing it manually. The benefit of procedural generation comes when you have to produce hundreds of them or you need to vary something very quickly. Because if something's procedurally put together, let's say a skyscraper, I've done procedural skyscraper before. So you do a skyscraper and you've manually put on, let's say, details like air vents and balconies and things like that. And someone comes along and says, can we have some more of those? And you just drag a slide and go bloop, and it's done if you've done it procedurally. Otherwise, it's a bit slower if you've done it manually. And suddenly someone says, oh, can we have it 5 stories tall instead of 6? Again, with a slider, you can pull it back down. So if you're in a position where you need to make lots of something, and that something has to be varied, then using procedural generation is a great way of approaching it. Certainly when it comes to modeling. When it comes to gameplay design and features, then or level design and procedural level design, it has its other reasons, like replayability.
Yeah, from a gameplay point of view, things like replayability, if it's built right into the core design of the game, just like multiplayer should be, right? This is a decision you make right at the beginning, because trying to make this work later is really problematic. I can see an instance of playing this RPG where you find a sword that is just really cool or perfect for that situation, or you go hunting, you really want one with certain materials because you know it's going to be really good in this dungeon.
Yeah.
I could see that as being part of the game, but tacking it on at the end doesn't actually add anything to the game. It has to be part of that journey. So a system whereby, you know, a certain shopkeeper might be giving extra discounts on or paying extra money for certain materials, for example. You can also get some really interesting things with the way we're using materials as well as meshes, because our weapons are procedure generated on a couple of different axes. So that when we're making axes, for example, certain axes might have detailing in the secondary material on the first material. Right, so you can start getting some really cool styles in there. There's also a lot more we can do with the procedural generation of the weapon, but that's something that we should experiment with, see what's possible, and then have the discussion. And that's really what's key here, is then Michael and I have to sit down and say, okay, so we want to do procedural generation. We've decided modular weapons is the way we want to go.
Yep.
So what does the workflow for the assets look like? Right? Because if I've now added in this thing where the order of the materials is going to make a material gameplay difference, then where do we go from there?
And it might not even be or just the materials that can make a difference. You could actually have models making a difference too. I could quite easily see a system in where you can expand what we're going to be teaching you so that you make, let's say, 5 varieties of blade or axe head, but then you give them levels of wear. So you actually put chips and chinks and in actually damage in there, where you swap out the actual mesh itself depending on the state of the weapon. Now you might not actually have a health to the weapon, but you could do. That's in a lot of RPGs. I mean, even Minecraft's got it, so you wear out a sword eventually. So you could change out the model like that. But that would also mean you could randomly generate loot, which meant that when you picked it up, it could have a different state of repair as well. And that may alter the value accordingly. Yep. So there's lots you can do with that. It's really exciting.
And there's also things like, we at the moment have 3 classes of player character, right? Yep. We have the adventurer or explorer, the mage, and the warrior. So one-handed sword, a wand, or a 2-handed sword.
Yeah.
We could do it so that the impact those materials are having is going to be different for each of those classes. So, for instance, the materials being used in a wand might be what the primary and secondary spells are.
Yes.
as opposed to the kind of damage it does. Which, from a sort of lore, and we're not really working on lore in this game, but from a lore perspective, has some really interesting implications, right? The materials you're using are what magic you get.
Yes. I mean, I thought that would be a very nice twist on it doesn't matter the abilities of a particular mage. So they don't learn how to do a fireball spell, so to speak. They have to have a fire wand in order to do fire spells, a water wand to do water, etc. The standard tropes in there.
Yep. So yeah, that's the kind of decisions we need to make, and then we need to go on to what's the size of each mesh.
Yep.
Because there's got to be a maximum and a minimum size for these things, if only because the way that they're being held. What's the order of materials?
Yep.
We've decided we're not texturing, but if we were texturing, that's going to be a whole different kettle of fish, ball of wax, a ball of waxy fish, kettles. Help.
Carry on.
No, that was it.
I'm watching from the sidelines.
And then we need to get them in such a way that we can actually generate a bunch. And I still need to figure out a good way to get them actually working in game. Because at the moment, the way our weapons work is a weapon is not a single thing. Well, there is a weapon class that has all the information about the weapon. I need to rewrite that to deal with which mesh are you, what type are you, what meshes are you using, what are the materials. Right now, we're not doing things like special flame effects, or we're not naming our weapons, so I don't have to worry about those. We've got the mesh body weapon, which is the one that's held in your hand and does damage. And then we've got the physics body weapon, which is the one that you drop on the floor and responds to physics. So we're going to need a way, of taking these modular weapons, such as Roderick's sword that procedurally turns into a battle axe.
It's not a bug.
One,
it's a
it
fixture.
has to be consistent. And two, if we're doing a roguelite, there should be a system whereby you can leave that weapon to the next character.
Yes.
So now we have to generate that between saves.
Especially if it's an epic, well, you have to keep what it is. So how that's stored, there are numerous ways you could store it. Like, is it a certain seed that gets stored? Or do you just bake it out?
Right. Do you make a file? Do you like save it as a probably not a JSON, but some sort of binary file? I would probably go with a seed or a code. So the first 2 digits would be which mesh is for the blade, or what type it is. Second 2 would be, or the first digit would be what type it is. The second 2 would be which meshes are we using.
Yeah.
Even that wouldn't work, but I'd probably go with that. So that all I need to do is in the save file, just save strings of characters
that are not human readable, but you can edit them for fun.
Which means if you ever patch the game and add more stuff in, you potentially break everyone's weapons.
Yes,
potentially. So yeah, there's a lot to sort of look at there, and part of it is now that we've got these in, I need to have a workflow whereby if Michael gives me 60 different blades as a random example, that should be as easy to make a bunch of different weapons that work in inventory, generate icons, which is a whole other thing we need to talk about.
Yep.
And can be dropped in the world and used and looted and sold and bought. Like, it needs to work within all these systems. Should we talk about icons? Because that's part of the workflow we've been talking about.
Yes. So whenever we've designed the icon, we've realized that we can't just take a snapshot of the swords. You saw even when they're blown up really big on the screen, some of the large broadswords end up getting cut off, which is no good. So we need a way of being able to artistically design icons so they match the sword type, but in such a way that materials can be swapped out on those as well, so they can be recolored so they work as icons.
And that led to me playing with the image class, which I haven't really played with before. And the documentation tells you, how to use it, but I haven't found any good tutorials. So what I've found is I can take 2 different icons. So in this case, let's say the blade and the hilt. I can say, make the image the first of those, make it the blade, Now blend it with the second and move the second to this position.
Yep.
But before you do those, recolor both images. So apply color here, apply color there. And that kind of works. And there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can do, for every pixel, so do 4x, 4y, or 4x in width, 4y in height. Go through every pixel, and if it's not alpha, recolor it. Or we could do multiply it by, which might work better, but can also look a little blurrier. But we now have a situation where if we're procedurally generating these weapons and we want players to want to pick up lots of weapons that they'll never use but might want to sell, then the player needs to be able to see in an instant, which is the one I'm keeping, what's the valuable one, what's good for this situation.
Yes, we realised very quickly that if you picked up 5 broadswords and you had to mouse over each one and wait until a tooltip comes up, that's not a great player experience. You should ideally be able to look at the weapon and know at least what type of weapon it is. We're not going to have levels of weapon, so there's not going to be like, a level 5 broadsword, a level 14, and a level 30 broadsword. Sorry, you can't use that one yet because of reasons. Even though you could use every earlier one.
You can't use this class of weapon because you're a different class.
But we don't have any distinction in level of weapons in our games. So you should be able to look at our weapons and know, that one's a gold and steel one is a great example.
Well, here's another example of why this is important. Like, you need to see it very quickly. If you're playing a mage, you have access to all these different ones that have different spells. Not every spell is going to be good in every situation. So if you suddenly find yourself surrounded by skeletons and the one you have is no good, being able to get into your inventory and find the one you want and swap it out before you get killed is a much better experience than going, well, there's nothing I can do because it's going to take me 20 minutes to find the right one.
Hold on a moment. Nope. So that begs the question whether we also need to have a look at the UI and potentially have more hot items, so that a character can press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way to. I mean,
that was a decision we made in the other direction earlier.
Yeah.
But do we need to revisit it? The more you have to revisit these, the harder it gets.
Yes, because you're like, but
because even changing these weapons from the way we had it to procedural is adding so many kettley fishworm ball waxes that it's actually taking weeks just to get the thing working in a way that feels good. You can't just go, okay, we'll just change the way the weapons work, everything's fine. Like, no, they're not. There's bugs everywhere. Yeah, now we only have the one-handed weapons anyway, but still.
Yeah, you often cannot just substitute one thing for another and expect it to work unless it is a one-to-one, which it never is. Yeah. I think when it comes to the icons, and like we were saying, because we've kind of made this ish decision on the wands being a certain type of wand, meaning a certain type of spell, I think you would want a hotbar capable of, queuing up the four good ones that you've got.
So I'm thinking potentially the blade or the top of the weapon, so the axe head, the sword blade, or the top of the wand, is the key, right? That's the thing that people are going to notice is visibly different.
Yeah.
So if each of those have 2 materials,
then we can sort it out from there. Yeah.
Right. And there's a couple of ways we could do that. We could just do a simple but pretty inefficient go through the entire image, change all the pixels by color.
I mean, that essentially can be generated at the beginning of a playthrough.
But it's still slower, right?
Yeah, much slower than just, we'll load up these 15 assets, boom. So always that's another downside of
each of the potential colors pre-made and just pick them, in which case the file size is much bigger, the load time is much bigger, but maybe it's the best solution. Like, it's one of those things we're going to have to play with.
Yeah.
Because it turns out procedurally generated UI is something neither of us have played with.
Watch this space. Procedurally generate everything.
Each blade / wand toppy bit being its own icon and the only part of the icon we care about seems more manageable than trying to fit the whole weapon in there.
It's just not possible with
Alternatively,
some weapons because they're too big.
you could make an argument for each image is actually its own viewport that you're dragging that is a 3D representation but no. When you've got 20 of these in your bag, I dread to think what that's going to do to the running of the game, and it's going to look terrible.
Yeah, I mean, it does it in a slower game where perhaps the opening up the UI pauses the game. Then
And the UI is most of the screen.
yes, where you open it up and you've got full screen character here, a huge chunk for your weapon, and then like your inventory over here. That makes a big difference compared to a more minimal style. And not saying, of course, that one is better or worse than the other. The truth is that they work in different situations.
So there's something I used to tell my technical theatre students. The wrong decision is the one you didn't make. And what I mean by that is not that if you've made a decision, it's right. What I mean is if you don't think about something, if you don't actually think about it and think what's best and make a decision, that's wrong. But if it's a case of which of these two is better, by thinking about it, you'll find the right solution, right? The aesthetic of the game, the feel of the game, the player experience, all of these things will give you the answer you need. So in our case, I would opt towards a stylized, clean iconography style of UI.
Yeah,
because it fits this clean, no textures image we've got.
Definitely.
But if we're doing a very gritty CRPG, isometric, top-down, lots of tiny little stats you want to compare, you need a lot of screen space for that, and potentially the ability to see each weapon in 3D in a preview window before you even touch it.
So, horses for courses, I think the shorthand for that is.
That's right. You could bring a horse to a course, but you can't change his pajamas.
It's a new one on me, but we'll go with it.
I was a professor. We also had a little conversation about level design, but I don't know that we have time for that right now. Maybe that's the next conversation we have.
Maybe. I mean, we can touch upon it at the moment.
Level design is really cool.
That's what we came up with.
Yep. It's. I found myself very, very impressed with the level design of the new map for Ark, Lost Island, because there's plenty of little secrets, and it's really easy not to notice how you're being guided to trip upon them and actually being steered in a certain direction. And it's very smoothly done, very cunningly done.
Yes, one of the things that I've noted with certain games. So my partner and I are playing through The Last of Us at the moment, and she was getting confused, being quite new to this genre of games and gaming in general. Where do I go? Who do I follow? The great one is you're trying to follow the person, and they're guiding you around, and the character mentions going to a gate, and so Karine goes to the gate over there instead of the gate over there. But there was nothing to say that was the case, and the character you're walking with is really idle and slow, and sometimes they're following you and sometimes you're following them. If you don't pick up on those cues, you get lost essentially. And then we were discussing about how any ledge in the game often has scrape marks. It often has like little flaps of something material coming down. So you've got this visual waving. You've got a bright yellow bar essentially saying climb here, and there's the scrabbling to make it, or the scratches to show you this is the way forward. And in some ways, that's really useful because it does help guide you through the game, and it's not too intrusive.
Yeah, ideally, you want to do these things in a way that the player thinks, I want to go this way, without feeling like they're having their hand held too much.
I mean, one of the great games for just climbing all over a city was Assassin's Creed. That you can pretty much climb anything and everything. Dying Light 2's just come out, and I'm really trying to resist buying it. But the Dying Light 1 was a zombie parkour game, so you're climbing all over the city and that. And whilst it did have clues of where to go, again, it was a more subdued thing because you could pretty much climb anything and everything. It was just if it was out of your reach, you wouldn't be able to do it unless you had a perk or something along those lines. But yeah, it's interesting guiding a sort of a subtopic of level design is how to guide your player through so they don't end up frustrated. I've certainly been frustrated in the old, you've got to find the yellow key and to open the yellow door, but you've discovered the yellow door first and the yellow key's on the other side of the map. Damn.
Yeah, I always struggle with Metroidvania style games for that reason.
A big one with Doom, you miss a little alleyway because everything's beige and brown.
Mm.
I remember getting lost with Doom for ages, and I'd be wandering around a level, and I will admit that I went into no clip mode to see where was I supposed to go. Oh, okay. Now I understand. But if it's not clear to your player, they can end up being frustrated, and if that happens really early in the game, you can have your player feeling like they're stupid. They should have been able to get that. Because one thing, I don't know if this applies to all games, but one thing the difficulty setting rarely does is change the level. It changes the difficulty of perhaps the character's health and, are they bullet sponges or not? But do you know of any games?
Left 4 Dead. And I haven't played the sequel for Left 4 Dead, which is, I can't remember the name of it. Just came out recently.
It's not a sequel, but yeah, Back 4 Blood.
Back 4 Blood.
Yeah.
I mean, it's spiritually a sequel. Left 4 Dead 2. Well, so Left 4 Dead would generate the levels for you, right? So the level's going to be.
I never got around to playing it. I'd love to, but
very good.
Yeah,
very good. Left 4 Dead 2 had the director, which was basically a scalable difficulty. So as you're playing, it's going to measure your performance.
Yep.
How quickly do you go through? How much damage have you taken? How many healer kits did you have to use? How much ammo do you have? And if it's too easy, it'll ramp up the difficulty.
It will leave you less drops.
It'll just spawn a whole bunch of bosses on the map, or bring in more hordes.
Nice. So that's a great example there. When we talk about level design, we're not just talking about where you place your main assets. Where's this corridor? And sometimes you have to split a level up for loading, or there's just too much on the screen, so you deliberately hide it behind something else for frame rate. That's been done time and time again. Half-Life always had those little sort of like corridors between areas where it could load.
Yeah, to hide a loading screen. And Mass Effect had those interminable elevator rides because it had to load a huge level.
How long does the elevator ride take you? Oh, only 2 minutes. What? Why did it take me 5?
Yeah. But the end of our conversation this morning about, or this afternoon, about level design and the skill of level design, it occurred to me that it reminds me a lot of classes I took as an undergrad in lighting design and set design for theater, because you're doing a very similar thing. You're guiding attention, you're creating a certain feel, you're making people feel clever for noticing certain things. It's really using environment in a way that crafts an experience. And that's what good level design is for me. Like when I'm playing Ark and I'm on the Lost Island and I'm going through a tunnel and I see this little bit of smoke in the corner of my eye and I follow it down this little dark tunnel and so there's little lights and there's mushrooms over here that guide me this way and I find this, hidden cave full of treasures. I feel very clever, but actually I've been guided every step of that journey.
But you've been silently guided, which is
in a way that, makes me feel like I have agency and makes me feel like I've done something.
So I remember talking to you about this earlier. So Dying Light 2, they've got like an E3 trailer, and then you've got the actual release game. And it's amazing how, obviously with a trailer, you're always going to have pre-rendered scenes, or it's been done on a supercomputer, not easily accessible hardware, that sort of thing. And it was amazing looking at the opening scenes compared with what they did with the trailer itself. The trailer's more cinematic. And again, it's not meant to show gameplay. It's supposed to get you excited about the game and the concepts. Once you're in the game and playing, obviously some of the prettiness is dropped down anyway so that everybody can play and you can turn those sliders up and down. But one of the most poignant things was I think you start off in a bathroom or something along those lines, as you walk through a door and meet one of the main characters. In the trailer, it was very cinematic and he was lit by the room in a dark and dingy bar. But in the gameplay trailer, the dark and dingy bar remains dark and dingy and he's lit up. So when it comes to the game itself, you can't always have it looking like a movie because the player won't know where to look. If you light up the main character and make everything else dark, you can't help but focus on the light thing on the screen. And I think that's why they've done that.
That reminds me of the Hitman series, the recent reboot, Hitman 1, 2, and 3, which are phenomenal. Like, I adore these games. But in the very first one, the very first mission, you're walking into this mansion during a party in France. There's this huge chateau-style mansion. And you get this wonderful like opening of these doors and walking through this little thing. And as you're doing that, the main target you've got to assassinate walks down the stairs into a spotlight and gives a speech. And just that highlighting of this is the important thing. This is what you need to do while you're hiding in a crowd. Like there's people around you. You see that little like stealth circle around you, and you're feeling very sneaky, and it's establishing that thing for you. And the level design in those is brilliant because the way it sort of presents all these different ways, and you feel very clever for finding these paths every time. Each thing that feels like a little secret that you've worked out. It's like, well, that was put there deliberately to sort of pull you in this direction to see what you wanted to do.
So a future live stream game level design discussion. Not Human Fall Flat. That game messes with my head.
Too wobbly. It is a wobbly game.
Very much so.
It's not the wobbliest game we've played. I think that's probably Sea of Thieves.
Yes. Because
a lot of people get motion sickness in that one. Future live stream gameplay design discussion. Yeah, I'd like to go through a level and talk about the level design.
And we could talk about it through all the different facets that a level designer would have to look at. You've got your basic layout. You've got your aesthetic. You know, is this going to be dark, lit up? Is it going to be used multiple times?
What's the best game to do that with? Because we need something that's reasonably small, but is a good example of what we're talking about.
Minecraft.
Minecraft was actually an example we came up with earlier.
Yeah.
I think it's a very good example of level design. Teardown.
Yep. We could do a missing the word. An autopsy. Yeah, or Hitman. Yep. Any of those games would be good. Anything that allows creative mode where we can potentially zoom out and move around would be fantastic, rather than one where we're stuck in one position and can't nip around quickly or have to complete a blooming level. Although that is part of the level design as well. How are you going to make funnel people, even if it's an open world, funnel them to this particular spot?
And what's the experience? Because the level design in Portal 2, for example, is superb. The level design in Viscera Cleanup Duty is superb. Those two games have very different criteria for their levels. Right? Viscera Cleanup Duty, there's all these little nooks and crannies you have to find to clean the guts out. Right? And it's frustrating but funny. Whereas in Portal 2, it's a puzzle that's very often fiendish the first time you play it, and after that it's fine. But it's that and the sense of humor is a big part of that.
So I have to laugh. I'll never forget sending down the lift of goop.
So Michael and I were playing a multiplayer Viscera Cleanup Duty, which is actually a surprisingly compelling game, especially if you're sitting there with a podcast.
Yeah.
It's something about taking this huge, filthy, blood-strewn, viscera-strewn level that some space marines and aliens have made a complete mess of and leaving it pristine. Like, there's that part of your brain that goes, yep, I did that. We're playing multiplayer, and of course the physics of the game is already deliberately difficult to deal with. Like, it's very easy to kick over a bucket full of dirty water and re-dirty the entire floor.
Yeah.
So Michael went up to the top floor and started cleaning.
I took loads of cleaning buckets and everything.
The buckets were downstairs, right? So rather than just come up down, he spent 10 minutes just filling the elevator with buckets of water, went up, cleaned the whole floor. What I didn't realize was he'd filled the elevator with buckets of dirty water. And when I called the elevator, they all jostled around and flowed onto me. And the entire level was just covered in blood. It was a shining moment. Like it was very Stephen King.
Yeah, my top floor, spotless. I came down, I was like, yeah, and what a mess.
The elevator doors opened. I actually screamed into the microphone in disgust as this wall of watery blood came towards me. So thanks for that, Mikey.
Oh, just imagine if it was in VR. Oh, that would be terrible.
It would be terrible.
Nice. So yeah, I think a future discussion on level design is definitely on the cards. We'll have to have a look around and see what or which games would be a great one, or prepare something where we can look at certain parts.
I mean, we've done in the past, not on these streams, but you and I've done in the past, like playing a game and talking about the design.
Yeah.
Whether it's the level design of the gameplay. I mean, we did Human Fall Flat, for example, which you and I both really enjoy. Not Human Fall Flat. Stick Fight.
Yes. Very, very straightforward game, but also very what's the best way of describing it? It's got great design for all of those people playing.
Yeah.
Even though
I was going to say Operation Tango would be good for this, but the amount of spoilers would be...
I think it's out long enough. We don't need to worry about spoilers.
Maybe.
People know
game
what
you can maybe
into.
play twice, and then you're done with it.
I don't know. The graphics are quite good. Even if we know what to do, sometimes it can be fun to replay a game. Yeah.
Well, that's
yeah,
what
I
I'm
like
thinking.
that.
Like, the level design in that is phenomenal.
Yes. And the fact that you and I will see completely different screens, that in itself is
worthy of examination.
That's how a level can be constructed two different ways, essentially. So we're reaching the point in the evening where we start to wrap up. And so we put it to you, the audience. Do you have any questions?
Thoughts?
Interpretive dances?
Questions?
We've had that.
Questions.
Yeah.
Jingles?
Hi,
Todd.
Hi. So yes.
Yeah. I'm just glad you didn't start rapping.
Why would I rap?
Because you were talking about wrapping up for the evening.
Missed opportunity.
I like some hip hop and rap, and it would have been very difficult for me.
Well, next time I'm not on water. I've run out of wine. So
how have you been, Michael? How have you been? That's a question from Roderick.
Well, I had my daughter had COVID, which was all kinds of fun. But she's old enough at the moment that homeschooling was easier this time round. Don't. Oh, bless you, Todd. Yep. Yeah, we stream 7 till 8, and sometimes a bit longer, depending on you guys and answering questions. That's usually how it goes on. But otherwise, yeah, I've been really good. Somehow we managed for it not to infect anybody else in the house. It's funny. So on the lateral flow test, you put the couple of drops on, and you get the water coming up, and then you have a control line appear. As we put the couple of drops on, and the liquid came up the lateral flow test, it just went before it even reached the control line. I was like, "To your room now. Put on a mask." Yeah. But yeah, I think we got off lightly on that one.
I think you did. I've been very, 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 very fatigued because I got new medication last month and my body still hasn't adapted to it.
Hopefully it will get there soon.
Hopefully we'll get there soon. I'm going to talk to my GP and ask if I can get the one that doesn't have decaf. Because I keep like talking to Mikey and then like, sorry, I'm going for a nap. Bye.
It's because my conversation is so stimulating.
Oh, I wasn't listening. What? Other than that, been well. Enjoying poodling around with Godot 4. It's still got some bugs in it, which are being worked on because it's just come into public alpha. Looking forward to making both the RPG and our big Godot course for people, which we haven't talked about much. I don't yet have a curriculum for it, but when we start getting closer to beta or full release, I'm hoping to just hit the ground running and start recording both the Godot RPG courses and this at the same time, which I'm sure will be a completely manageable and utterly fine workload. It's fine. It's fine.
It's fine. What will that take? Only like a month or 5.
A month every week. Yep.
Yeah. Cram.
Du-du-du.
Well, the one thing we don't want is just repeat the same issues that we've had in the game industry for years now, where there's this huge crunch, but
Yeah.
it's just a crunch with a bigger crunch at the end.
And I want to make sure don't repeat the same content as Discovering Godot. I don't want people to make the same games, because that's not a great learning journey. I want to adapt some of the things I've learned from making Discovering Godot, and the other courses, and really just sort of map out what the journey's going to look like, what's going to be included. I don't know that. I mean, we can't cover everything the engine can do because it's not how courses work.
Well, it would just be too big a course that would be very difficult to navigate. I've had that in the past with Blender as well. It's nice to have a bite-sized bit of everything, but not go too deep. Or you can have a course that's deep, but doesn't cover a breadth of knowledge. You know, it might just focus on texturing, and boom, that's it.
But the Godot course will be, not the RPG, but the complete Godot course, not what we're calling it, I'm not announcing the name just yet, will be project-based. So each section is going to be a game or a toy you're going to be making, because it's a good way of dealing with large amounts of information. They're going to build on top of each other, so we'll start with something very simple that teaches the very basics. And by very basics, I mean, variable, function, node, tree, that kind of thing. Reading the output window, the stuff you need to get started. And from there, we can start going into some 2D games and some 3D games, and who knows, maybe some 5 and 6D games.
What happened to 4D?
Well, time is involved in both the other games.
My hypersphere would like a word with you later.
I'm sorry, I'm on the 11th dimension now.
I can't.
Basically, I want to take your brain to another dimension.
Pay close attention.
Sorry, one for the Prodigy fans there. So yeah, I'm looking forward to.
Prodigy fans would have not liked that.
No. But God of War is still very much in the early stages. It's very good. I'm enjoying it a lot, but it's crashing. I'm having issues loading scenes in where they're getting corrupted. Like, it's not ready for a course.
Yeah, it. From what I've seen so far, when you do struggle with it and you actually get a pretty thing, you can actually get a pretty thing in there, but it's just a matter of time before it's boop, gone.
Yeah. I really like playing with the navigation, though. I mean, the fact that you can bake navigation at runtime means procedural maps are much easier.
Yes, a lot of the problems we had in Godot 3 when it came to the procedurally generated maps are solved.
And the fact that you can put navigation obstacle node into objects, and it'll know I have to go around this.
Great for doors opening and closing.
Tables, chairs, like your skeletons won't run into a bookshelf.
Oh.
And I mean, if you don't want them to, right?
Yeah, they won't try and make a beeline to you and slide along a table.
Yeah, or just push the table along.
I'm gonna kill you.
And they get it wedged in the door, and you've got the whole problem of I can't kill you, you can't kill me.
Do-da. Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. And
thank you for having me. I had a lovely time, and thank you for the cake and the ice cream.
I don't have either of those.
Thank you for joining us, everybody. I hope you have a lovely time. We may not be here next week because Mikey may not be available. Will the skeletons run into the closet? There are skeletons in the closet. I haven't yet talked to them if they're going to stay in the closet or if they want to come out the closet. I don't really want to pressure them. It's up to them. Basically, I don't want to make that decision for them.
Which I think is fair enough. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you next week or the week after. We'll let you know.
One of those.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye. Press it.